Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing our series on Ralph Waldo Emerson's journals. We are halfway through one set of the journals. We are up to June 29th of 1831. Emerson is 28 years old, and this first journal entry that we will read is from Chardon Street, Boston. And with that said, I'll go ahead and start. Is not the law of compensation perfect? It holds as far as we can see, different gifts to different individuals, but with a mortgage of responsibility on every one. The gods sell all things. Well, old man, hast got no farther? Why, this was taught 3 months and years ago. It was writ on the autumn leaves at Roxbury in keep school days. It sounded in the blind man's ear at Cambridge, and all the joy and all the sorrow since have added nothing to thy wooden book. I can't help it. Heraclitus grown old complained that all resolved itself into identity. That thought was first his philosophy, and then his melancholy, the life he lived and the death he died. And I have nothing charactered in my brain that outlives this word compensation. Old Stubler, the Quaker in the Baltimore steamboat, said to me that if a man sacrificed his impurity, purity should be the price with which it would be paid. If a man gave up his hatred, he should be rewarded with love. 'Tis the same old melody, and it sounds through the vast of being. Is it a great exertion to you to contain your roving eye? Is it very easy to please it, and very hard to forbid it? Well, exactly proportionate is the merit of the self-denial and the power it confers. Is it a great estate that is within your grasp? Will a little servility, a few derelictions not gross themselves, and such as few can know, suffice to give you an uneasy subsistence for many years? And do you say it were foolhardy to toss your head with unseasonable virtue that perhaps you will not sustain, and lose the prize? But will you gain nothing by the loss? Consider it well. There is no cheating in nature, not a light halfpenny, not a risk of a doit which is not insured to the total amount on the credit of the King of Nature. By that sacrifice of body to soul, of the apparent to the real, have you not given body and fact to a sentiment which, if it is not recognized on change, is sterling with God and his creation? Have you not been filled, spiritualized, exalted by a delicate, rare magnanimity which constitutes you a nobleman in the kingdom of heaven? Have you not given firmness to your brow, and unquestionable majesty to your eye, when you meet other eyes, a serenity to your solitude, yea, just so much of assured presence of God to your soul? 'Tis a noble but a true word of Bacon, quote, if once the mind has chosen noble ends, then not virtues but divinities encompass it. Here follows several Latin words, and there's no translation given. And so it is, these sentiments are the true native angels of the kingdom, having their lineage written on their faces. The adoption and act of a great sentiment gives you assurance on the faith of him that liveth, that you have made exactly that progress which you seem to have made. But my riches add nothing to me. They make no evidence, but only bewilder my inquiries for truth. In the most barren, echoing solitude, in small, disagreeable circumstances, these thoughts give a round of assurance most solid. In a hovel, low born and fed on husks, you may think thoughts and act after a manner that you are not sure is qualifying you every day for the most exalted enjoyments of friendship, though the word may be gibberish or a laughing stock in that place. The friends exist, and the sympathy is forming, though perhaps years or ages may intervene before the good effects you seek on God's faith shall be fully accomplished before this union takes place. What matters it to the mind, as far as concerns the evidence, how one or another fact looks, what may be the aspect of things towards materialism, what may be the impression got from geology, or the conatus, or equivocal generation, or any other humbug? Does not every consciousness contain its own evidence? That consciousness which, quote, cannot ferment its mass of clay, that apprehends death will die, that which looks death in the face, the master, not the slave, carries therein its own hope and assurance. Now my affections prophesy to me out of heaven, where my angel is, and when I listen to them, I do not fear death. I see plainly that ends to which I live are independent of time and place, and neither the hope nor the fear of conscience profess themselves satisfied with the scanty inches of mortal life. June 30th. One thought more has occurred to me. If there is no logic by which these thoughts cohere, the mind itself uttering necessary truth must be their vinculum, and that is, that God makes us the answerers of our own prayers, and so fulfills the cycle and perfection of things, and as in others, so in prayer, to be immortal. Obedience is the eye which reads the law of the universe. Rejoice when you have not bent your desires to your convenience, but have rested in no good below to the level of your desires. Use locks to ascend streams, but never to descend. Go buoyed up on high as sentiments of heaven will, and do not huckster with sense and custom, but treat with princes only, a sovereign with a sovereign. July 5th. It is remarkable that we cannot be willing to say, I do not know. I am ashamed of my ignorance of history, of science, of languages daily. All error, Dr. Johnson said, is mean. And by this powerful shame doth God wonderfully indicate to us his intention that we should study and learn without end. July 6th, 1831, the following is a poem. All the great and good and all the fair, as if in a disdainful mood, forsake the world, and to the grave repair. Is there a sage needed to curb the unruly times? He hastes to quit the stage, and blushing leaves his country to its crimes. Is there an angel dressed in weeds of mortal beauty, whom lavish heaven with all sweet perfection doth invest? It hastes to take what it hath given. And as the delicate snow that latest fell, the thieving wind first takes, so thou, dear wife, must go, as frail, as spotless, as those new fallen flakes. Let me not fear to die, but let me live so well, as to win this mark of death from on high, that I with God and thee, dear heart, may dwell. I write the things that are, not what appears, of things as they are in the eye of God, not in the eye of man. Here's another poem. Its title, it appears, is in ancient Greek and there's no translation for it. However, the poem itself is in English. If thou canst bear strong meat of simple truth, if thou durst my words compare with what thou thinkest in the soul's free youth, then take this fact unto thy soul. God dwells in thee. It is no metaphor nor parable. It is unknown to thousands and to thee, yet there is God. He is in thy world, but thy world knows him not. He is the mighty heart from which life's varied pulses part. Clouded and shrouded there doth sit the infinite embosomed in a man. And thou art stranger to thy guest, and knowest not what thou dost invest. The clouds that veil his life within are thy quick woven webs of sin, which his glory struggling through darkens to thine evil hue. Then bear thyself, O man, up to the scale of compass of thy guest, soul of thy soul. Be great as doth beseem the ambassadors who bears the royal presence where he goes. Give up to thy soul, let it have its way. It is, I tell thee, God himself, the self-same one that rules the whole, though he speaks through thee with a stifled voice, and looks through thee shorn of his beams. But if thou listen to his voice, if thou obey the royal thought, it will grow clearer to thine ear, most glorious to thine eye. The clouds will burst that veil him now, and thou shalt see the Lord. Therefore be great, not proud, too great to be proud. Let not thine eyes rove, peep not in corners, let thine eyes look straight before thee, as befits the simplicity of power, and in thy closet carry state, filled with light, walk therein, and as a king. And as a king would do no treason to his own empire, so do not thou to thine. This is the reason why thou dost recognize things now first revealed, because in thee resides the Spirit that lives in all. And thou canst learn the laws of nature, because its author is latent in thy breast. Therefore, O happy youth, happy if thou dost know and love this truth, thou art unto thyself a law, and since the soul of things is in thee, thou needest nothing out of thee. The law, the gospel, and the providence, heaven, hell, the judgment, and the stores immeasurable of truth and good. All these thou must find within thy single mind, or never find. Thou art the law. The gospel has no revelation of peace or hope until there is response from the deep chambers of thy mind thereto. The rest is straw. It can reveal no truth unknown before. The providence, thou art thyself that doth dispense wealth to thy work, want to thy sloth, glory to goodness, to neglect the moth. Thou sowest the wind, the whirlwind reapest, thou payest the wages of thine own work through all the ages. The almighty energy within crowneth virtue, curseth sin. Virtue sees by its own light, stumbleth sin in self-made night. Who approves thee doing right? God in thee. Who condemns thee doing wrong? God in thee. Who punishes thine evil deed? God in thee. What is thine evil need? Thy worse mind with error blind, and more prone to evil, that is, the greater hiding of the God within. And next the consequence, more faintly as more distant, wrought upon our outward fortunes. There is nothing else but God where'er I look. All things hasten back to him, light is but his shadow dim. Shall I ask wealth or power of God, who gave an image of himself to be my soul? As well might swilling ocean ask a wave, or the starred firmament a dying coal, for that which is in me lives in the whole. July 6, 1831. President Monroe died on the 4th of July, a respectable man, I believe. Emerson writes on relation of morals to intellect. Shaftesbury's maxim that wisdom comes more from the heart than the head, quote, do the will, know the doctrines, impera parendo. Obedience is the eye which reads the law of the universe, for the moral sense is the proper keeper of the doors of knowledge. Whom he will he lets in, and whom he will he shuts out. A polemic, a partisan, for want of a candid heart, becomes miserably ignorant of the whole question. But the point of view is of more importance than the sharpness of sight. Fittilon anticipated Adam Smith. The eye, too near, turns the fairest proportions of architecture or of sculpture into deformity. Now goodness is the right place of the mind. Make known the law, and you can dispense with collecting the particular instances. Kepler's second law was seen at once to contain, and so make useless and ridiculous, all the tables that were made or could be made of falling bodies. Emerson speaks on advantage of the 19th century. I pay $20 or $30 to the government of my country a year. If I had lived before it was discovered that we could do without a court, I should have paid twice as much and been otherwise troubled. If I had lived earlier, before some moral discoveries were made, I could not have sustained the independent fashion of living I do for less than the support of a garrison of guards. For, plain gentleman as I am, and living no better than 1,000 persons in this city, I do believe I live better than any person, not a gentleman or knight, in 11th, 12th, or 13th centuries. If I had lived earlier, I must have been my own guard, and that duty would have taken up all my time, and left me none for speculation. In other words, I should have been a savage. See then what discoveries moral progress has made. July 8th. No man can write well who thinks there is any choice of words for him. The laws of composition are as strict as those of sculpture and architecture. There is always one line that ought to be drawn, or one proportion that should be kept, and every other line or proportion is wrong, and so far wrong as it deviates from this. So in writing there is always a right word, and every other than that is wrong. There is no beauty in words except in their collocation. The effect of a fanciful word misplaced is like that of a horn of exquisite polish growing on a human head. To the same purpose I find at this date in Guesses at Truth, quote, "In good prose," says Schlegel, "every word should be underlined," end quote. Quote, "No italics in Plato," end quote. In good writing, every word means something. In good writing, words become one with things. I take up a poem if I find that there is not a single line there nor a word, but expresses something that is true for me as well as for him. It is adamant. Its reputation will be slow, but sure from every caprice of taste. No critic can hurt it, he will only hurt himself by tilting against it. This is the confidence we feel concerning Shakespeare. We know, Charles says, that his record is true. And this is the ordeal which the new aspirant, Wordsworth, must undergo. He has writ lines that are like outward nature, so fresh, so simple, so durable. But whether all or half his texture is as firm, I doubt, though last evening, the 27th of October, I read with high delight his sonnets to Liberty. July 10th. Old English writers are the standards, not because they are old, but simply because they wrote well. They deviated every day from other people, but never from truth, and so we follow them. If we write as well, we may deviate from them, and our deviation shall be classical. Emerson writes on, "He invents who proves." Every man says 100 things every day that are capable of much more meaning than he attaches to them. The Declaration of Independence, as Webster intimates, deserves its fame, though every sentence had been somewhere said before. That gave it flesh and flower. Not that man is the abolisher of slavery or of intemperance who calls them evils, but he whose discerning eye separates between the existence of society and these evils, and sees that those mainly peel off and the institutions remain whole. July 14th. One of the arguments with which nature furnishes us for the immortality of the soul is, it always seemed to me, the awful solitude in which here a soul lives. Few men communicate their highest thoughts to any person. To many they cannot, for they are unfit receivers. Perhaps they cannot to any. Yet are these thoughts as much made for communication as a sex. Ellen wondered why dearest friends, even husband and wife, did so little impart their religious thoughts. And how rarely do such friends meet? Here I sit alone from month to month, filled with a deep desire to exchange thoughts with a friend who does not appear. Yet shall I find or refind that friend? Samson goes about, yet never speaks what his soul is full of. Barnes also, Mrs. Lee, Mott, S.A.R., they cannot discharge this subtle electricity for defect of medium or of receiver. But was this glorious fabric made for nothing? Will not its day and its means and object come? Will not heaven's matches be made or restored? July 15th. Nothing more true than the saying, "Spiritual things must be spiritually discerned." God in us worships God. The things taught in colleges and schools are not an education, but the means of education. Fable that love and death exchanged arrows by mistake. July 21st, 1831. The feast is pleasant, but its joys have no afterlife, and seem to be a subtraction from our mortal work-day of so much. Why not follow out the great idolatry, no, the great penchant of the human mind for friendship? Is it not beautiful, this yearning after its mate, its mate? I mean by spiritual affinities and not by sex. I never hear of a person of noble feelings, but I have the emotions of the moral sublime, such as is caused by reading Young's line, quote, "Forgive his crimes, forgive his virtues too, those minor faults half converts to the right." Or Shakespeare's "The more angel she," which Coleridge quotes, or Bacon's sentence, and then here is a series of Latin words with no translation, also Greek words added to, with no translation. I put together these with pleasure as 2 or 3 specimens of that peculiar and beautiful class of thoughts which set you aglow. Non verba sed tonitria audo, another Latin phrase. Well, just as such a feeling I have in hearing of C.G.L.'s or J.A.'s or anybody else's noble sentiments. Now, if surely I knew there was a mind somewhere thinking and willing, that is a repository of these sentiments, a hive of chosen knowledge, a knower and lover of the golden laws of the intellect and the heart, and that in future I am to meet this mind in connections of most cheerful and close fellowship, should not I be glad? Yes, indeed, the rainbow, the evening star, day, night, storm, sorrow, death, they would seem preparations, they would seem subjects for this delicious conversation. When I think of you, sweet friend, wife, angel Ellen, on whom the spirit of knowledge and the spirit of hope were poured in equal fullness, when I think of you, I am sure we have not said everlasting farewells. The impulses of a heart of faultless sentiments would be as much an object of exact calculation as the effects of caloric or azote. How very thin are the disguises of action. These men that came today to 3 Greek letters came with their purposes writ as legibly on every proposition as if they had said, "I wish an audience when I hold forth." Another, "I hate Everett." Another, "I am an anti-Mason." Another, "I love young men." Another, "Truth." A rich man may lawfully have handsome house and furniture. He is doing better than his money for the world than if he gave it to the beggar, but he must adorn his house with the principle of love running through every detail. Quote, "'Tis use alone which sanctifies expense, and splendor borrows all its rays from sense." End quote. All possessions that end in self are odious. The man who shuts himself up in solitary splendor hath much of the devil in him. Books are to be read, and every library should be a circulating library. Pictures are to be seen, and are as if they were not, when unseen, and palaces have no other use. Emerson writes on the real power. Most things and presidents by titles are merely clerks of some real power which stands erect at their side and subjugates them. Cromwell and Bonaparte are men in my mind far more respectable than James I of England or George IV. For if they used hypocrisy to rise by, they rose more by the energy of their own will, and though thoroughly selfish, they scorned a servile selfishness. They took off the slave's cloak when they had got up, and tossed it down in the face of all the mob below. They kicked while the ladder down crushed whom it might. Whilst these other gentlemen, and woe is me, my country, many great gentlemen in thy chairs, sit with it on. If I want a favor of the President of the United States, I need not cultivate his personal kindness. I will ask it of his President, the bad party in the country, and if they say yea, I shall be sure of Mr. Jackson's bow and smile and sign manual. Whilst I admire Cromwell and Bonaparte, however, for the simplicity and energy of their evil, I lose my reverence the moment I consider their ends. I see they were both wholly mistaken, blind as beetles. Power is a trust, so also is genius or every degree of wisdom. Dined with President Adams yesterday at Dr. Parkman's. Emerson writes on God misrepresented. Mr. Blank said to a woman doubting, "Do you not fear God?" Does not the feeling that your whole future destinies for happiness or misery are in his hands terrify you? She said, no, she wished it did. The question was false theology. It does not recognize an immutable God. It was for the woman to become happy or miserable, not for God to make her so. July 29th, 1831. Suicidal is this distrust of reason, this fear to think, this doctrine that 'tis pious to believe on others' words, impious to trust entirely to yourself. To think is to receive. Is a man afraid that the faculties which God made can outsee God, can find more than he made, or different, can bring any report hostile to himself? To reflect is to receive truth immediately from God without any medium. That is living faith. To take on trust certain facts is a dead faith, inoperative. A trust in yourself is the height, not of pride, but of piety, an unwillingness to learn of any but God himself. It will come only to one who feels that he is nothing. It is by yourself without ambassador that God speaks to you. You are as one who has a private door that leads him to the king's chamber. You have learned nothing rightly that you have not learned so. God does not use personal authority. It is the direct effect of spiritual truth to abrogate, nullify personal authority, to make us love the virtue in the person exactly by the measure of his virtues, but not to honor the inherent evils for the sake of any person. He is no respecter of persons. And that is the wrong whereby theology has injured Jesus Christ, insisting upon a love to him as a duty. Nobody will ever be loved by compulsion. Love is the reward of loveliness. Tell not me to love my Savior. No, do him not that injustice, but fill me with his goodness, and I shall love him, of course. Make me as pure, as meek, as useful, and I shall love him as certainly as a stone falls. Quote, the progress of custom is arithmetical, of nature geometrical. End quote. Bacon. Quote, we think after nature, we speak after rules, we act after custom. End quote. Bacon. Quote, manifest merits procure reputation, occult ones fortune. End quote. Bacon. August 15th. The world becomes transparent to wisdom. Everything reveals its reason within itself. The threads of innumerable relations are seen running from part to part and joining remotest points of time and space. I read verses today of Thomas Campbell about the poles which are alive. Most of the pleasures of hope has no life. Dead verses. August 16th. Every composition in prose or verse should contain in itself the reason of its appearance. Thousands of volumes have been written and mulled in libraries of which this reason is yet to seek does not appear. Then comes Adam Smith, Bacon, Burke, Milton. Then comes any good sentence, and its apology is its own worth. It makes its pertinence. Emerson writes on man's reputation. There is an engine at Waltham to watch the watchmen of the factory. Every hour they must put a ring onto the wheel, or if they fall asleep and do not, the machine will show their neglect and which hour they slept. Such a machine is every man's reputation. August 26th. Yesterday I heard John Quincy Adams deliver an eulogy upon President Monroe, but he held his notes so close to his mouth that he could be ill heard. There was nothing heroic in the subject, and not much in the feeling of the orator, so it proved rather a spectacle than a speech. September 7th. I think it better to drink water than cider or ale. I think 2 cups of tea better than 3. Tentandum est. Emerson speaks on silent speech, poverty. This one is laden with lots of Latin quotations here. There is one by Jeremy Taylor and one by Plutarch. There is something in quotations here in English, so I will read that. Quote, "To be taught first to be silent, then to speak well and handsomely is education fit for a prince." I believe that is a quote of Plutarch. Then follows another Latin quotation, and I'm not sure if it's from Plutarch or somebody else, but that's the end of the journal entry for September 7th. September 13th, 1831. The things which are taught children are not an education, but the means of education. The grammar and geography and writing do not train up the child in the way it should go, but may be used in the service of the devil. Education is a drawing out the soul. September 14th. Mr. Walker said in conversation that the information that death must probably take place soon commonly gave steadiness to the mind and enabled it to do what was fit with more ability. The mind, he said, never plays false. It is always equal to all it is called to meet. Emerson writes shortly on Who Knoweth? The first question still remains to be asked after all the progress of science. What an abyss is my ignorance? September 14th, 1831. Robert Raikes and Mrs. Catherine Capp, the founders of Sunday schools 50 years ago. Mrs. C. a little the first. Raikes saw the word try as it were written before him. Now 2,000,000 children attend them in 4 continents. Emerson writes on Every Man's Gauge. I suppose a skillful judge of character would get some measure of the whole from the smallest actions and from trifling conversation. All would be arcs, however small, of the same circle, and from the whole circumference might be drawn. The swing of his arm, however free and violent, is determined mathematically by the length of the bones. Every motion bears some proportion to the fixed size and form of his whole frame, and so the measure of his mind determines as accurately every word he utters. Emerson writes on miracles. It is impossible that Omnipotence should make a ball pass from one point to another point without passing through a space equal to the straight line betwixt it. This necessity the mind perceives. Does not the same necessity make Leibniz's law of continuity manifest? If we knew more of matter, would not this absurdity strike us as lying against miracles? I think it would in common understanding of them. Let then a miracle be the effect of far greater knowledge of the laws of nature, and so a superior command of nature. Imperat perendo. Emerson speaks on compensation. Is it not one of the most thrilling truths of moral science that I write below? The savage of the Sandwich Islands believes that whenever he overcomes and slays an enemy, the strength and prowess of that enemy passes into him. The soul instructed by God knows that whenever it overcomes a temptation, it becomes stronger by the strength of that temptation. But for heaven's sake, do not, to use the vulgar expression, treat your resolution. Haec est mors mea. It is my opinion that because of the law, that every truth you receive prepares the mind for the reception of an unknown truth. September 15th. I often make the criticism on my friend Herbert's diction that his thought has that heat as actually to fuse the words, so that language is wholly flexible in his hands, and his rhyme never stops the progress of the sense. And in general, according to the elevation of the soul will the power over language always be, and lively thoughts will break out into sprightly verse. No measure so difficult but will be tractable, so that you only get up to the temperature of the thought. To this point I quote gladly my old gossip Montaigne, quote, "For my part, I hold, and Socrates is positive in it, that whosoever has in his mind a sprightly and clear imagination, he will express it well enough in one kind or another, and though he were dumb by sighs." Here follows a untranslated quotation from Horace, and then one from Seneca, and then Cicero. Here is one by Robert Burns, however, that is in English, and it says, "Oh, how that name inspired my style! The words come skelpin rank and file, amazed before I ken. I am glad to have these learned Thebans confirm my very thought. September 21st. Pestalozzi, a venerable name after witnessing the events of the French Revolution, concluded in 1797 that the amelioration of outward circumstances will be the effect, but never can be the means of mental and moral improvement, a paralogism to the old words, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Chardon Street, September 30th, 1831. Pleasant it is to the soul, painful it is to the conscience to recognize wherever you go the fixed eternity of moral laws. You cannot be too kind, you cannot be too unjust. There is no excess of observance. Be kind in the stage, be kind in the pew, keep your word, be kind in a quarrel. Bear yourself so on all occasions, saith one, that the opposer may beware of thee. Jesus says, so bear yourself as if your trade and business was to serve that man. Don't lose this principle a moment, and your character will be its commentary and exposition. Here follows a poem. A dull, uncertain brain, but gifted yet to know that God has seraphim who go singing an immortal strain, immortal here below. I know the mighty bards, I listen when they sing, and more I know the secret store which these explore, when they with torch of genius pierce the tenfold clouds that cover the riches of the universe from God's adoring lover. And if to me it is not given to bring one ingot thence of that unfading gold of heaven his merchants may dispense, yet will I know the royal mine, and know the sparkle of its ore, celestial truths from lies that shine, explored they teach us to explore. October 3rd. I wish the Christian principle, the ultra principle of non-resistance and returning good for ill, might be tried fairly. William Penn made one trial. The world was not ripe, and yet it did well. An angel stands a poor chance among wild beasts, a better chance among men. But among angels best of all, and so I admit of this system that it is, like the free trade, fit for one nation only on condition that all adopt it. Still a man may try it in his own person, and even his sufferings by reason of it shall be its triumphs. Quote, the more falls it gets, moves faster on. Love is the adamantian shield that makes blows ridiculous. If Edward Everett were a sanguine philanthropist, not a shade would attach to his name from the insults of Platt. But he is thought a selfish man, so by his own law must he be judged. The Mussulman by the Koran, the Jew by the Pentateuch. One thing more. It is said that it strips the good man bare and leaves him to the whip and licenses of pirates and butchers. But I suppose the exaltation of the general mind by the influence of the principle will be a counteraction of the increased license. Not any influence acts upon the highest man, but a proportion of the same gets down to the lowest man. Signboards speak of Titian, a regular ladder of communicating minds from Webster down to Joe Cash. Emerson speaks on creeds. People would teach me what they think concerning modes of justification, and how their supposed officers of Christ are compatible with the Father's dignity, etc. Will they teach me how to resist my temptations? Will they teach me how to be a good man? I have nothing to do with their creeds. It is more than I can do now to keep the commandments. Yet they want more than these. I can't keep these, can they? Do they? I think they have no idea how much is contained in them. Yea, Calvinism lays the salve to this very sore and says, because you can't keep them, here is blood to expiate. Only give your assent, and it produces no higher level of obedience in the multitude than in the professors of another faith. Quote, all that is simple is enough for all that is good. Don't meddle with others, nor with high beliefs, but strictly keep your own soul. Try to keep the 10 Commandments a day. You will find they mean enough literally. Well, then take them with the New Testament exposition and keep them from the heart. Boston, October 21st, 1831. People talk with a sneer of those who comfort themselves for the evils of life by an imaginary heaven, and they rightly ridicule them who thus do. But Christians do it not. Their heaven is prophesied in their virtuous purpose, and begins in their first deliberate virtuous action, and is established in their virtuous habit. It is not a false or imaginary heaven. Every man, as far as his virtue goes, says it is good. He cleaves to it amidst his wickedness, blasphemy, scoffing, and stupidity. He gets credit for it. He loves it. He does not abhor himself because of it. Of this grain of antidote to his evils. Take it out, and he would hang himself. Is it not good to have right opinions, to understand oneself, to know what is and what is not? Men think that instead they are to take religious truth on trust. Impossible, not on the Word of God Himself. Truth is never crammed down your throat, but is to be understood. Have you not guarantee enough in your own constitution for the discretion of God? Well, this is a part of heaven, to know as we are known, to see what is now hid, to have every secret thing work out its full effect. Quote, He that made the heart, shall not he understand? Boston, October 24th, 1831. Quote, Admiration ennobles and blesses those who feel it. The lover is made happier by his love than his mistress can be. Like the song of the bird, it cheers his own heart. Why are we commanded to give glory to God unless we ourselves may be made godly? Guesses at Truth, Vol.2, page 115. Quote, Glory is a light that shines from us on others, and not from others on us. Landor. See Quincy's definition. Quote, Some minds think about things, others think the things themselves. Schelling. Then there is an untranslated Latin quotation from Cicero. And then something in Greek, followed by the words, etc. And it is like Webster's skill in law, who knows what it is, in other words, what it should be, and story can tell the authorities. Emerson now speaks on Shakespeare. One thing strikes me in the sonnets, which in their way seem as wonderful as the plays, and perhaps are even more valuable to the analysis of the genius of Shakespeare, and that is the assimilating power of passion that turns all things to its own nature. See sonnet, quote, Oh, never say that I was false of heart, etc. And sonnet, quote, Since I left you mine eye is in my mind, or, quote, From you have I been absent in the spring, or, quote, What is your substance, whereof are you made, And then see the immortality of the human spirit in them, for who but an eternal creature could so think and express himself as in, quote, If my dear love were but the child of state, or, quote, No time, etc. And listen to the stern morality that seems to inform them all and to be present in the eye of the poet, even when contradicted in the expression, but present in spirit and letter in, quote, the expense of spirit in a waste of shame, etc., or, poor soul, etc. What follows is entitled Thekla's Song. A footnote says, translation from Schiller's Wallenstein, Edinburgh Review, October 1830. Quote, The clouds are flying, the woods are sighing, the maiden is walking the grassy shore, and as the wave breaks with might, she singeth aloud in the darksome night, but a tear is in her troubled eye. For the world feels cold and the heart gets old, and reflects the brighter aspect of nature no more. Then take back thy child, holy virgin to thee. I have plucked the one blossom that hangs on earth's tree. I have lived, I have loved, and die. October 27th. What we love, that shall we seek. The heart is the sole world, the universe, and if its wants are satisfied, there is no defect perceived. But how little love is at the bottom of these great religious shows, congregations and temples and sermons, how much sham. Love built them, to be sure. Yea, they were the heart's work, but the fervent generation that built them passed away. Things went downward, and the forms remain, but the soul is well nigh gone. Calvinism stands, fear I, by pride and ignorance, and Unitarianism, as a sect, stands by the opposition of Calvinism. It is cold and cheerless, the mere creatures of the understanding, until controversy makes it warm with fire got from below. But is there no difference in the objects which the heart loves? Is there no truth? Yes. And is there no more power in truth to commend itself? Yes. It alone can satisfy the heart. Are we asking you to love God as if there was any arbitrary burden from duty imposed, as if we said, apart from your usual loves, come and cultivate this? It is sour, but it must be done, for such is the hard law. No. God forbid. We call you to that which all things call you, unto the softest persuasion, to that which your whole reason enjoins with absolute sovereignty. We call you to that which all the future shall teach far more forcibly and simply than we now. These things are true and real and grand and lovely and good. Is it not all in us? How strangely! Look at this congregation of men. The words might be spoken, though now there be none here to speak them, but the words might be said that would make them stagger and reel like a drunken man. Who doubts it? Were you ever instructed by a wise and eloquent man? Remember then, were not the words that made your blood run cold, that brought the blood to your cheeks, that made you tremble or delighted you, did they not sound to you as old as yourself? Was it not truth that you knew before, or do you ever expect to be moved from the pulpit or from man by anything but plain truth? Never. It is God in you that responds to God without, or affirms his own words trembling on the lips of another. November 1831. Have been at the examination of Derry Academy, and had some sad but pleasant thoughts. Is it not true that every man has before him in his mind room one direction to which there is no bound, but in every direction he runs against a wall in a short time? One course of thought, affection, action is for him, that is his use, as the new men say. Let me embark in political economy, in repartee, in fiction, in verse, in practical counsels, as here in the Derry case, and I am so soon run aground. But let my bark head its own way toward the law of laws, toward the compensation or action and reaction of the moral universe, and I sweep serenely over God's depths in an infinite sea. In an unknown wood the traveler gives the reins to his horse, seeks his safety in the instincts of the animal. Trust something to your instincts far more trustworthy. As there is always a subject for life, so there is always subject for each hour, if only a man has wit enough to find what that is. I sit Friday night and note the first thought that rises, presently another, presently 5 or 6. Of all these I take the mean as the subject for Saturday's sermon. November 4th. God is not in a hurry. Don't be impatient of riding in a stagecoach and talking less religiously than the orthodox passenger, and wish yourself shown to them doing something, because you would act as a religious being, though it is not in you to talk after their manner. God will provide opportunities. Calmly wait. Now is an opportunity. You can't be true to their principles, but you can to yours now in sitting with them. Your understanding of religion is that it is doing right from a right motive. Stick to that mighty sense. Don't affect the use of an adverb or an epithet more than belongs to the feeling you have. November 5th, Friday. As religious philosophy advances, men will cease to say, the future state, and will say instead, the whole being. The aim of the wise man will always be to set his tune on such a key as can hold to bring his life level with the laws of the mind, not of the body, because those endure. Third Sunday of December I exchange with Mr. Barlow. Second Sunday of March, Mr. Francis. Here is a poem entitled Robert Burns. But fare you weel, old Nicky Ben, O wad ye talk a thought and men. Ye Abelins might, I dinna ken, still hae a stake. I'm wae to think upon yon den, even for your sake. If it be comical, yet it belongs to the moral sublime. Thy tuneful flame still careful fan, preserve the dignity of man with soul erect, and trust the universal plan will all protect. He tells the mouse that he is his fellow mortal. The whole mouse piece is capital and this sublime. Still thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee, but oh, I backwards cast my ee on prospects drear, and forward though I cannot see, I guess and fear. November 18th. As respite from the blank affair, read Wordsworth, River Dudden, Ode to Duty, Rob Roy. Excellent, much happier diction than ordinary. The poet's epitaph fine account of the poet, quote, "You must love him ere to you he will seem worthy of your love," end quote. But miserable is the last verse, and in the intended thought poorly half conveyed. But sublime is the severe, eternal strain called Dion. What they say of Laodamia were better said of this, in other words, about being read to heroes and demigods. Are not things eternal exactly in the proportion in which they enter inward into nature, eternal according to their inness? Quote, "For deathless powers to verse belong, and they like demigods are strong, on whom the muses smile," end quote. Wordsworth. So also such a line as this in Dion. Intent to trace the ideal path of right, more fair than heaven's broad pathway paved with stars, which Dion learned to measure with delight. So excellent also is the piece called The Happy Warrior. Come up, William Wordsworth, almost. I can say Coleridge's compliment, which is untranslated in Latin. His noble distinction is that he seeks the truth and shuns with brave self-denial every image and word that is from the purpose, means to stick close to his own thought and give it in naked simplicity, and so make it God's affair, not his own, whether it shall succeed. But he fails of executing this purpose 50 times for the sorry purpose of making a rhyme in which he has no skill, or from imbecility of mind losing sight of his thought, or from self-surrender to custom and poetic diction, such as the inconsistency with his own principles and the 2 lines about the cestus and thunderer's eye, etc., Volume 3, page 27. He calls his brother, quote-unquote, a silent poet, and almost every moral line in his book might be framed like a picture or graven on a temple porch, and would gain instead of losing by being pondered. November 19th. I apologized for his baby pieces to my mother by saying he was Agesilaus who rode on a cane with his children. She said that Agesilaus did not ride out of doors. November 21. Spoke with Mrs. Baxter, Foster, and Moore at the gate of Mayhew School. They all came into my study. Mr. Foster agreed to meet the committee at the schoolhouse at 12 o'clock, but did not appear. While the committee waited there, Mr. Allen came in to inform Mr. Blank of the threats, etc. So it was agreed that I should request of the mayor a peace officer, which I did. November 22nd. Marriage of G. L. Emerson. November 23rd, 1831. In connection with the great doctrines of compensation or reaction, we get the best insight into the theory of prayer. It teaches that prayer does not at all consist in words, but wholly is a state of mind. Consider it also in connection with the doctrine that God is in the soul of man, and we shall make another step towards truth. For it is not to be expected that God should gratify any man in an unreasonable request only because he asks it violently, but precisely in proportion as a man comes into conformity with God, he asks right things, or things which God wills, and which therefore are done. And then he is wholly godly, or the unfolding God within him has subdued all to himself. Then he asks what God wills and nothing else, and all his prayers are granted. In this sense, the promises of Christ to his disciples may be understood. Were they not rather admonitions that they should bind, or they should loose, as God would? And I easily believe that Elijah or Peter or John, uplifted in a rapture of devotion, thought with the mind of God for the moment, and so the miracle was wrought. Then there is a Latin quotation which states Aristotle's reputed death speech. It is a curious compensation to be noticed of such as I, that those who talk when everybody else is silent are forced to be silent when everybody else talks. November 25th. Read Moeller, Volume 1, with great pleasure. Emerson speaks on elevation and sorrow. May I not value my griefs and store them up? I am imprisoned in the forms and uses of every day, and cannot surrender myself to the sweet bitterness of lamenting my beauty, my glory, the life of my life. The glory of acting from the feeblest right motive, and seeing the compensations of the moral universe justify you to the coldest reason, and the simultaneous elevation of the character. Ascend a mile where you will, and the barometer indicates the same levity of air. Rise to the same height of motive in what unfavorable circumstances soever, and you belong to the family of lofty spirits, are adopted into them, ennobled by their title, enrolled in their rank and chapter on God's book, and forever to be treated as one of them, and by all, even though God, for this present, separates you from them, though you never saw one of them, though your lot be low and hard and condemned and insulted by those whose unhappy eyes cannot see you through the disguise of low condition. This is the oil of joy for mourning. December 2nd, 1831. The day is sad, the night is careful, the heart is weighed down with leads. What shall he do who would belong to the universe, and live with the living nature, a pure rejoicing thing, O friend that said these words, are you conscious of this thought and this writer? I would not ask any other consolation than to be assured by one sign that the heart never plays false to itself when, in its scope, it requires by a necessity the permanence of the soul. December 3rd. The boys in the streets say to each other, "Dick, toss the ball to me, you know me," which seems to argue a confidence of each child in its own worthiness of love. It is not less, I suppose, true of men. If they were known out and out, through and through, they would be more loved than now. Many dark steps would be explained. Is this a kinder philosophy than that of the anti-deception sermon? I write the things that are, not what appears. Write upon the several classes of ignorant men, and upon the wise man. Wisdom is insight. Ignorance is outward sight. The enterprising, shrewd, learned, scoffing, ignorant, whose mind is but the mind of his own eyes, he is a slave, So love of nature, the soul and the body of things are harmonized. Therefore the deeper one knoweth the soul, the more intense is the love of outward nature in him. December 10th. Write upon the coincidence of first and third thoughts, and apply it to affairs, and to religion and skepticism. I should like to know if anyone ever went up on a mountain so high as that he overlooked right and wrong, and saw them confounded, saw their streams mix, that justice did not mean anything to his mind. Unevenness of character. Every man is one half of a man, either benevolent and weak, or firm and unbenevolent, either a speaker and no doer, or a doer and no speaker, either contemplative or practical, and excellence in any one kind seems to speak defect in the others. This wisely ordered for the social state, and the individual expectation and effort seems to promise completeness of character in the whole future. Our very defects are thus shadows of our virtues. Opposition of first thoughts and common opinion. God has the first word, the devil has the second, but God has the last word. We distrust the first thought because we can't give the reason for it. Abide by it, there is a reason, and by, long hence, perhaps it will appear. How we came out of silence into this sounding world is the wonder of wonders. All other marvels are less. Charles has gone away to Puerto Rico. God preserve and restore him. When you confer a favor, be careful how you do it. It must be done with the remembrance of your own squirming when you have received one, and feel that the whole difficulty lies in receiving, not in giving. Memoranda. Committee of Evangelical Treasury concerning pews of American Unitarian Association. Mr. Thayer and Collar, also soliciting subscriptions committee. Pemberton Fund for Miss Blank. Tuesday, House of Industry. Nothing done at random. No accidents in nature. You go out of a city and come to social disorder and wilderness, never get out of God's city. Order everywhere, morals paramount, equality of number of the sexes, proportion of vegetable and animal life. December 14th, 1831. It will not do to indulge myself. Philosopher or Christian, whatever faith you teach, live by it. Who opposes me? Who shuts up my mouth? Who hinders the flow of my exhortation? Myself, only myself. Cannot I conform myself to my principles? Set the principles as low, as loose as you please. Set the tune not one note higher than the true pitch, but after settling what they shall be, stick to them. December 19th. When I talk with the sick, they sometimes think I treat death with unbecoming indifference, and do not make the case my own, or if I do, err in my judgment. I do not fear death. I believe those who fear it have borrowed the terrors through which they see it from vulgar opinion, and not from their own minds. My own mind is the direct revelation which I have from God, and far least liable to mistake in telling his will of any revelation. Following my own thoughts, especially as sometimes they have moved me in the country, as in the Gulf Road in Vermont, I should lie down in the lap of earth as trustingly as ever on my bed. But the terror to many persons is in the vague notions of what shall follow death. The judgment, and uncertain judgment to be passed upon them, whether they shall be saved. It ought to be considered by them that there is no uncertainty about it. Already they may know exactly what is their spiritual condition. He will not suffer his Holy One to see corruption. What are your sources of satisfaction? If they are meats and drinks, dress, gossip, revenge, hope of wealth, they must perish with the body. If they are contemplation, kind affections, admiration of what is admirable, self-command, self-improvement, then they survive death and will make you as happy then as now. December 20th, quote, Time was his estate, end quote, Italian philosopher Johnson, Volume 5, quote, daily self-surpassed, end quote. Alexander, 33 years. 30 years, age of having done most. Scipio, Hannibal. Revivals wrought in a moment, great discoveries, great thoughts, great deeds. It only takes a moment to die or to kill. What can't then be done in a year? Life long enough for any good purpose, a year long enough. Quote, Action comes less near to vital truth than description, end quote. Plato, Republic, Book 5. Quote, Poetry is something more philosophical and excellent than history, end quote. Aristotle, Poetica, Chapter 10. When you throw a stone, the way to hit the mark is to look at the mark and not consider how you swing your arm. When you speak extempore, you must carry your thoughts to the person opposite and never think of the manner. December 25th, to Miss Emerson. What from the woods, the hills, and the enveloping heaven? What from the interior creation, if what is within be not the Creator? How many changes men ring on these two words, in and out. It is all our philosophy. Take them away, and what were Wordsworth or Swedenborg? The rough and tumble old fellows, Bacons, Miltons, and Burkes, don't wire draw. That's why I like Montaigne. No effeminate parlor workman is he, on an idea got in an evening lecture or a young man's debate, but roundly tells what he saw, or what he thought of when he was riding horseback or entertaining a troop at his chateau. A gross semi-savage indecency debases his book, and ought doubtless to turn it out of doors. But the robustness of his sentiments, the generosity of his judgments, the downright truth without fear or favor, I do embrace with both arms. It is wild and savory as sweet fern. Henry VIII. I love to see a man, and it is exhilarating once in a while to come across a genuine Saxon stump, a wild, virtuous man who knows books, but gives them their right place in his mind, lower than his reason. Books are apt to turn reason out of doors. You find men talking everywhere from their memories, instead of from their understanding. If I stole this thought from Montaigne, as is very likely, I don't care. I should have said the same myself. Boston, December 28, 1831. The year hastens to its close. What is it to me? What I am, that is all that affects me. That I am 28 or 8 or 58 years old is as nothing. Should I mourn that the spring flowers are gone, that the summer fruit has ripened, that the harvest is reaped, that the snow has fallen? Should I mourn because so much addition has been made to the capital of human comfort? In my study my faith is perfect. It breaks, scatters, becomes compounded, in converse with men. Hume doubted in his study and believed in the world. Mr. Robert Haskins quoted a significant proverb, that a woman could throw out with a spoon faster than a man could throw in with a shovel. Quote, Always be sticking a tree, Jock. It will be growing when ye are sleeping, was the thrifty Scotchman's dying advice. Always be setting a good action to grow, is the advice of a divine thrift. It is bearing you fruit all the time, knitting you to men's hearts and to men's goods and to God. And beyond this, it is benefiting others by remembrance, by emulation, by love. The progress of moral nature is geometrical, celestial economy. Authors or books quoted or referred to in journals of 1831. Homer, Iliad. Anaxagoras. Socrates, Plato, Republic. Aristotle, Poetica. Cicero, De Senectute. Horace, Plutarch, Plotinus, Porphyry, Thomas à Kempis, Luther, Montaigne, Calvin, Shakespeare, Sonnets. Bacon, Burton, Sir Thomas Browne, Milton, Jeremy Taylor, Herbert, Lovelace, Swammerdam, Newton, Skugel, Fenelon, Young, Swedenborg. Abraham Tucker, in parentheses Edward Search. Samuel Johnson, Adam Smith, Burke, Schlegel, Guesses at Truth, Schiller, Wordsworth, Dion, Rob Roy, Laodamia, Happy Warrior. Mrs. Barbauld, The Brook, Dugald Stewart, Burns, To the Dale, Kirby, De Stael, Schelling, Scott, Byron, Campbell, Pleasures of Hope, Coleridge, Landor, Imaginary Conversations, Mueller, Karl Ottfried or Wilhelm, ? Webster, Everett. And this is the end of Emerson's journal collection number 22. In the next video, we will begin with journal number 23, which begins in 1832 in Boston, and Emerson at that time is age 28. Thank you for listening.